Welcome to Deconstruct, a podcast from The Real Deal. I'm Lilah Burke.
And I'm Hannah Kramer.
And today we're going to be talking about AI and all of the effects that it's likely to have on real estate.
Plus, we'll get into the reasons I think Billionaires Row is over, and we'll take you through some of the top headlines that you need to know in the world of real estate this week.
Let's dive in. All right, for The Real Deal's June issue, we devoted several stories to AI and how it is affecting real estate. Here to talk a little bit about how AI is affecting brokers, residential buyers, and more is our features editor, Kara Eisenpress. Kara, thank you for joining us on the pod.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me.
So to start, tell us kind of why now? Like, why these stories? Why is AI kind of the topic that we needed to cover across a whole package in the magazine?
So reporters were coming in with just interesting tidbits and pitches about AI, and not just the new cool company that was offering something easy or great or advanced to agents on the Resi side or to operators on the commercial side. They were starting to talk about sort of some bigger, sweeping, and actually more human effects. And once I recognized that pattern, and we were hearing it both on the Resi side and on the commercial side, I said, maybe this is, the time to go for it. The other thing that happened was that earlier in the year, there was a lot of panic among investors, this sort of like AI fear trade with this idea that no one was ever going to have to work in an office anymore, and that could be really bad for commercial. And I think we're still seeing some shadows of that, in the stock market. And so when all those three things came together, I said, why not, hit it now, it's time.
All right, and let's start with the residential side. So we had a very kind of fun story from reporter Jake Endersky. How is AI affecting that side of things?
So yeah, Jake really got into the weeds with brokers and got them talking about their clients. And I think that is really where we're starting to see it. So clients are coming in with a lot of ideas. He compared it to the medical industry where, your patient comes in and says, well, Dr. Google said, this is my diagnosis. And doctors now have this sort of additional kind of psychological work of, telling their patient, maybe that's not your diagnosis. Maybe we have to look at the actual science or results. And so what that translates to in residential brokerage can have really tough results for deals. So some of the examples he came in with were like, clients would run their own comps. And so they'd get a really great analysis of those comps. And they'd say, I am not offering $1 over 10 million on this listing that's maybe for 12 or 13 million. That's it. That's perfect. And the agents, they're never even going to look at your offer. That's nowhere in the ballpark. And instead of a client retrenching and saying, well, you're the expert, you know best, you ran the comps, they sort of have this sort of outsized confidence from the chatbots that this is the right thing. And eventually, sometimes they'll figure out, why did we come to 10 million? Oh, it's because you forgot that, this has these amazing amenities and all of your comps were in buildings without amenities, for example. And so that's the kind of thing where, as an agent, if you can't persuade your client to offer a little more, that deal's never going to happen.
Right. And there was a funny story, too, where both sides, were using AI and, couldn't come to an agreement because their chatbots were telling them that they could do better.
Right. I mean, if you've used it for any questions about your personal life or anything, you notice, it always is kind of on your side. It knows how you're leaning. The same way you know which friend to call when you want one kind of advice and who to call when you want the other advice. It can read you. And so it's telling the buyer one thing and the seller the other thing. And if they're both using it, it becomes very hard to get close on a deal. I think it sort of shows, a couple of things. One is this old text saying garbage in, garbage out. So it's only as good as what you're feeding it. I think the other is this idea that it might be incredible at algorithms, but there's still just always this human error. Humans can be very overconfident and sometimes a little stupid.
Right. When we talked to Jonathan Miller about this a couple weeks ago for a video that we did with him, he sort of said, how does the AI know if 30 feral cats have been living in the basement for, 8 months? Like, it doesn't. And neither does the potential buyer until they either go tour the house and then probably have to deal with, the seller's broker or talk to a buyer's broker who can figure it out for them.
Right, exactly. And I think, Jake had this nice ending to his story, which is, well, one thing that the brokers have on their side is that they are everywhere. There are so many brokers for the number of homes sold in this country that you're going to end up using a broker even if you thought you could maybe just rely on AI.
Okay, and let's talk a little bit about CRE. So there's two parts of what we're talking about here. There's how AI is affecting brokers and how AI is affecting the market as tech companies buy up office space. Let's talk a little bit about the market. What are we seeing there?
So there's two sides here. So the sort of bear side is that we are at the beginning stages of a major disruption in the office market. And so companies, they're not pausing any expansion that they're going to be doing in the next 3, 6, 9 months, but they are pausing their long-term planning because they just don't know what their staffs are going to look like as they see real efficiency gains from AI. And so that's, sort of terrifying to a number of office brokers and owners of offices all around the country, especially on the coast, I think. And then the sort of much more optimistic side is, well, like any new technology, there's efficiency gains, and then that's leading to some major new growth in companies. And so we're seeing AI companies or AI-enabled other kinds of companies staffing up and taking on new leases and being really excited to grow. That's what we covered in our CRE stories. So Liz Cryan and Chris Neely got into what that is like on the ground. You have these AI companies flush with VC cash and very excited to grow, to get the most talent on their staffs, and to sign leases like yesterday.
And some of these potential new tenants from these AI companies, they're pretty quirky, right? Tell us about that.
They are just changing the entire tone of office leasing. So a lot of them are very, very young. They're coming out of college. Maybe they didn't even go to college or finish before they started their companies. So one broker told our reporters, I thought I was going to see a stroller joke, but, they sometimes come with their parents, dad's weighing in, maybe he's a real estate lawyer, and they often operate only by text. So it's like, hey, it's 4 p.m. It's like, hey, can I see the office tonight? And they're getting rolling immediately. And that actually extends to letters of intent. So where normally you might have this months-long dance between a potential tenant and a landlord, getting to know you, what would the build out look like, yada, yada. This is letters of intent are getting signed in a couple of days. They also are very worried about the air quality. I think when you have higher oxygen content in the air, you can think better.
Okay.
And so they're bringing their CO2 monitors on the tours. And this is not a one-time thing. Several brokers reported that this was something that they had seen.
But going back to the leases themselves, these are fast growth young companies, but they don't all make it, right? So is that kind of shifting what some of the terms look like on these deals? Because traditionally offices, they're long-term deals, they're pretty stable. You're locked in for, 10, 15, maybe 20 years. And some of these companies are going to fail in the next 3.
Some are going to fail and some are going to grow really big. So they put a big premium on flexibility in leases, whether that means, do you have the space for me to take on an additional 10, 20, 30, 40,000 square feet next year? Or can I get out of this lease if I need to? And obviously, we're coming out of a time, especially in San Francisco, where the landlords are really excited to have these tenants who are super eager to be there, who are willing to pay often extra large security deposits since they don't have a long company history. But then that does mean on the other side that they're offering this flexibility.
And these tenants usually want people in the office a lot, right? Which is good for office landlords.
That's the other piece of it is one tenant at the former Domino Sugar Factory, which Two Trees has turned partly into offices, told a broker, we're going to be in 996. And she's like, what does that mean? And it's just 6 days a week from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m.
Those are like some Wall Street hours.
Longer.
Yeah. So before we go, we're still trying to get a picture here, I think, of how fundamentally AI is going to change both the world of real estate and, the economy more generally. Obviously, we know that people are using it on a day-to-day basis, making their own lives easier, more convenient. There are tons of things you can use to, optimize your daily existence. And now we know from these stories that there's a real shift in buyer-seller psychology on the Resi side, a real shift in the office market we're starting to see on the commercial side. But this is very much not the end of the story. So what's next?
Right. So, we have definitely heard about efficiencies in the industry as the reporters were out reporting. People are using it for all kinds of uses, as you said. So far, though, it just isn't clear what the long-term effect is, how much downsizing we really see in what one REIT analyst called the office using market. And what he went on to say is that this is really a story of jobs. So who works in offices? People with a certain kind of job, right? And so we have to be understanding what is happening to jobs in this economy before we can really understand how that influences the office market. And honestly, that then has an effect on retail real estate, and it has an effect on residential real estate, because if there is a humongous change in how many people are needed to do a certain job, that means less disposable income potentially. That means people move to different places. And so the jury really is still out on exactly what's going to happen. And honestly, in the worst case scenario for humans, real estate's probably the least of our problems.
All right, Kara, well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
All right. I want to tell you a little bit more about my favorite story this week, a little bit of a prediction. I think that the era of building super luxury condos, these kind of super tall, super shiny towers that we've seen pop up all over New York City, especially on Billionaires Row, I think that era is really coming to an end.
Okay, tell me why.
So we had two different stories this week that showed me some kind of not so great signs for the developers and some of the investors involved in a couple of these projects. The first one was about Harry Macklowe. So Harry Macklowe, famous developer here in New York City and kind of the driving force behind 432 Park.
Okay, what's happening to him?
Well, for the last couple of years, 432 Park has really been mired in particularly this construction defects lawsuit. People who are living in the building are not so happy with how it was built. And that has had some pretty tough consequences for Macklowe as well as CIM Group, who was his partner and the sponsor on the project.
Okay, so this is the thing where the facade is crumbling, right? It's like $20 million condos and it's falling apart?
Yeah, at least that's what the condo board says. And so the latest news update here is that Harry Macklowe originally owned 2 penthouses in the building. He was named as a defendant in this construction defects lawsuit alongside CIM Group. He argued to the judge that, the condo board should have to pay his legal fees since he was at one point a part of the condo board. The judge says, no, got to pay for your own lawyers. But bigger picture here, Macklowe has had a really tough time with this project. I mean, CIM Group came in and rescued him on it as far back as something like 2010. So it's taken forever to get this out of the ground. Now it's facing these construction defect lawsuits. CIM Group foreclosed on those 2 penthouses of his. He put them into bankruptcy to avoid that foreclosure. But, they've had all of this back and forth. And ultimately, he wasn't able to sell those penthouse units for his own profit. So it doesn't seem like he made out as well on this project as people think of when they're thinking about, Billionaires Row, super splashy stuff.
Right. Okay. So 432 Park, not doing so well. Is there more?
Yes. So at the National Association of Real Estate Editors conference, Kevin Maloney, who is one of the leaders of PMG, a big development firm that we follow here in New York and in Miami as well, he basically said that while 111 West 57th Street is, an architectural marvel, that financially it's been kind of a disaster.
How so?
He pointed to the fact that it came onto the market, a couple years after the sort of super luxury go-go market where everybody was snapping up these, condos, all cash, hundreds of millions of dollars flowing in really quickly to the market. So he pointed to that. But he also said that, we've had some positive news about 111 West 57th Street in the past couple of months. Nikki Fields has come in and taken over the marketing of the building. They seem to be kind of getting the last couple units available there snapped up. But, Kevin Maloney says that money went to pay a senior lender on the project. Apollo, which is one of their biggest lenders, still has not seen their debt completely paid off, which, leaves these developers in a tough spot as kind of the final units get snapped up.
Mm-hmm. So the developers haven't made any money off of this project yet, right?
Well, that's not exactly what I'm saying, right? And I would say the contrary point to my prediction that, people won't want to build these billionaire buildings anymore is that a lot of the ways that developers make money is from their fees, right? The fees that they're charging over the course of the project, which can vary from, construction fees, marketing fees, management fees. Rich Bachman in our latest magazine wrote a really great piece on the way that these fees work. And they can be incredibly lucrative for developers, even when, they're not able to pay off all of their lenders over the course of a project. So a project that might look like kind of a financial failure, the developer can sometimes still do really well on it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so give me a big picture here, though. Billionaires Row. It's over? If you're building something there, maybe you should put it on ice, or maybe not?
Well, look, certainly the amount of land left there is becoming scarce. But what I would say is that I think developers will still want to try to build these projects whenever they can. The question is really that, as investors come in and start to look at these projects and see that, some of these haven't done as well as they might have. The investors are often the ones who are coming in and saying, wait a minute, what was this fee for? What exactly am I paying you for here? And similarly to the way that, activist investors have come in recently and criticized a lot of REIT CEOs, this is something else that we've covered, have criticized a lot of REIT CEOs for their compensation packages, saying, hey, maybe this company is doing fine or is doing okay or is doing a little bit better than it was when the market was really down, but they're not doing anything that special. Why is their compensation package so enormous? The same way that those activist investors are coming in and questioning that in the publicly traded companies, I think some of the institutional investors may start to question, exactly how much money are you, the sponsor, you, the developer, making on these fees? And is this really something that I want to do if I'm not 100% sure that I'm not going to get washed out?
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, it's a new New York.
Very well could be a whole new era, billionaire-less in Mamdani's New York City.
It's only been 6 months, but it's happening.
Seems like. All right, let's jump into our headlines for the week. Tell us about Compass.
Right. Okay. So the big news this week is that the Compass Anywhere merger is under investigation for antitrust issues from the New York Attorney General's office. Now, the Justice Department declined to investigate the merger when it was happening, but the New York Attorney General seems like they might have some questions for Compass. And Compass quintupled the number of agents that they have under their umbrella with this merger. Huge market share in New York, some estimates over 30%. That does flag, antitrust concerns for regulators.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, even just to look back at our brokerage rankings, our brokers and agents rankings from last year. You can see that even if the combination was just, say, Compass and Corcoran, you'd be creating, those two are already big powerhouses. You're creating a really, really big force to reckon with in the residential industry. Obviously, the New York AG's office is going to be coming around asking those questions. Is this a monopoly, basically? We'll have to find out, but I'm going to be really interested to see.
Yeah, and I should say we broke this news, so we'll be all over it. So look on our site for more information.
We definitely will be covering that closely. Going now down to Washington, where we are tracking the ascendance of development scion Bill Pulte from, Pulte Group leader to first FHFA head leading Fannie and Freddie, and now to National Security Director, replacing Tulsi Gabbard. Pretty interesting move through the ranks of Washington there.
Right. What does this mean, you think, for a Fannie and Freddie offering and privatizing them?
I think, This plan that Bill Pulte had in place to take Fannie and Freddie private was certainly an ambitious one, something that's very, very complicated. It seems like people are saying that if he's going to take on the role of national security director, obviously totally outside the realm of real estate, a very complicated job, he's probably not going to have time to oversee the Fannie Freddie IPO. So that might be on the back burner for now. But we should say he doesn't have universal support for this position, right?
Right. Mitch McConnell came out the other day and said that he doesn't plan to vote for him because he has zero national security experience, which is kind of what you might want on the job. So we'll see if he really ascends and if this really takes up a lot of his time.
Yeah. Interesting to keep an eye on, though, all of our real estate characters, getting into it in Washington. In other quick political news, I want to just touch on the primary that is happening out in California on Tuesday. So just under a week from when you'll be watching this episode, Californians voted in the primary for new governors of the state and new mayors potentially in Los Angeles. We don't have the final tally here. California does a lot of mail-in voting, so we're waiting on final results. But when we taped this episode on Thursday, you'll be watching it on Monday a few days later, the frontrunners in the governor's race were Republican Steve Hilton and Democrat Xavier Becerra. And in the mayor's race, it looked like Karen Bass, the current mayor of Los Angeles, would be in a runoff, most likely with former reality TV star Spencer Pratt, with city council member Nithya Raman having a little bit of an insurgence, but we'll see whether or not she can kind of pull back in the lead. But I should just say there are a lot of real estate issues at stake in the state of California right now. So whoever becomes the governor, whoever becomes the mayor of Los Angeles are going to have a lot of complicated issues to deal with.
Definitely.
All right, and for our last piece of news this morning, Lilah, tell us about the data that you got from Moody's.
Sure. So you may know that a rent freeze is very much on the table in New York City. Now, this is for rent-stabilized apartments, which make up about half of New York's rental housing stock. Moody's came out with an analysis saying that about 6% of multifamily loans would default as a result of a 5-year rent freeze by 2030. Now, a lot of people are saying that, okay, this is only a small percentage of landlords that would default. This definitely supports the cause for a rent freeze. I will say that when you dig in a little closer, that's all multifamily properties and loans. So when you dig into just rent-stabilized properties, it's about 8%. And about 14% would be in default by 2030. But Moody's researchers went through and found that a lot of those loans were distressed anyway, and some of those defaults couldn't be tracked specifically to a rent freeze. So this data, tenant advocates and others are putting out press releases saying that, it really supports their cause. Landlords, I'm sure, won't totally see it that way.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting that people are not considering, even 6 or 8% of buildings defaulting a problem. I mean, that still is, let's say 1 in 20, more than 1 in 20 buildings, multifamily buildings in the city going into default. Like, it's a not insignificant portion.
Yeah, I think people phrase it the other way, as in 94% of buildings are fine, and 94 is a kind of big number. So, but yeah, it's kind of the devil's in the details, and it's a little bit of how you look at it.
Yeah. All right. Well, we will be covering the Rent Guidelines Board. We'll be covering more on AI, the California governor's races, and many more real estate issues in our episode next week. Thanks for tuning in.
See you next week.